CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Britain's Boris Johnson faces a rebellion from his own party as lawmakers vote on new COVID rules for England.
A warning: German economic growth will be lower than expected next year as supply chain problems and COVID-19 infections continue to bite.
Hungary's central bank raises interest rates again as surging inflation threatens to damage Viktor Orban's re-election hopes.
And yet another deadline. US senators are racing against time to raise the government's debt ceiling and avoid a federal shutdown.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing a major rebellion from his own party.
Over 70 members of the ruling Conservatives are expected to vote against making COVID-19 passes mandatory for large venues, including nightclubs.
The tighter restrictions follow news of the death of the first patient exposed to the Omicron variant.
Well, let's talk now to Andrew Wilson, who joins us. So, Andrew, why is Boris Johnson's proposal under threat when other attempts to bring in restrictions were almost unanimously supported?
His power situation is completely different from what it was at the beginning of this pandemic. Robin, he's no longer has the commanding presence on the political scene that he had even a year ago, and so he's considered weaker in that respect, and therefore, if he has trouble pushing this vote through, which he has had on other votes in the past, it'll be seen as a demonstration of that he's losing his power. Now, the debate is already getting quite vigorous. We're seeing a couple of hardline Tories, Conservative MPs, one, Liam Fox, saying that these figures about the Omicron variant are not proven yet, that there's an element of exaggeration and fear-mongering going on, and this is where the far right of the Conservative Party rejects the government's position that they should clamp down on the country again. Now, there's not going to be any lockdown, but one of these votes is about COVID passes, and parts of the Tory party are completely against any kind of COVID pass being used by people, even though this COVID pass is just being recommended for getting into large sporting events and gatherings and people with large numbers of people together. So it's not something that would be deployed very often. But the real nub of this is that if Boris Johnson needs to get this vote through, which he will get through, he'll have to do it by going to the opposition, to the enemy, to the Labour Party. Labour Party generally supports these measures, and so they'll vote in favour of it. So the vote will carry, but there are elements now of Boris Johnson's party that will look at him and say, we can't have a leader who has to go to the opposition to get the votes he needs to push through legislation. It's a sign that he's weaker. And perhaps that will start some whispers around Westminster that already the Conservative Party might be looking for another change of leadership.
And Andrew, these planned restrictions are because of the threat of the Omicron variant. How serious is that now?
Well, if you listen to some of the comments in the House of Commons today, not that serious. There are plenty who are saying, look, we can carry on the way we're going, a bit of distancing, wearing masks. There's no real evidence yet that this new variant is particularly deadly or particularly dangerous. The evidence from South Africa so far is that the symptoms are mostly mild. Hospitalizations haven't gone up that much. But on the other hand, the UK is a very different country to South Africa. The average age of people is 14 years, yet less than the average South African. So they're a younger population in general. And also there's been this extrapolation by the scientists in the UK where, for example, looking at the figures of confirmed Omicron infections yesterday, 4,713 cases. Sajid Javid, the health secretary, said yesterday that could mean, in terms of that being the tip of the iceberg, something like 200,000 cases in the UK. That's a real long shot, but if it's anywhere near the truth, and it does double every 3 days, then the UK could be looking at 1 million infections by the end of the weekend, say. Sajid Javid spoke again in the Commons today, and you can see that as health secretary, he is pretty concerned about the situation.
We don't yet have a complete picture of Omicron's severity. Even if severity is significantly lower, then the much higher transmissibility of Omicron means it still has the potential to overwhelm the NHS. And let's say, just for argument's sake, if I say to honourable members, for argument's sake, that Omicron was only half as severe as Delta, half as severe. After the lag between cases and hospitalisations has taken effect, then this would mean it would only buy you 2 days. It would buy you 2 days before Omicron hospitalisations reach the same level as Delta.
So in all likelihood, the vote will pass in the government's favour tonight, and things will carry on as planned into Plan B. But one of the popular questions being asked of ministers today, particularly Sajid Javid, was what are you going to do if things get worse during the Christmas period? Parliament goes into recess next week for the holiday period, and so there won't be any decision makers around to vote on any new legislations. There have already been questions to the government today through Sajid Javid saying, well, if you need to make any more decisions over the Christmas period, will you recall Parliament? Now, that's a rare thing to ask over the holiday period, and it does suggest that there is a limited supply of trust in the House of Commons at the moment to rely on the government to do what is the overall will of the voting body of 650 MPs. They do seem to think perhaps there's a danger that, again, Boris Johnson, feeling threatened by the numbers, will make some action by himself unilaterally.
OK, Andrew Wilson, thank you very much.
There's still no sign of a breakthrough between Iran and 6 other countries at the Vienna nuclear talks. Diplomats have been trying to reach agreement for 4 days to revive a 2015 deal to limit Iran's nuclear development programme. Johannes Pleshberger reports.
The finger-pointing continues amid apparently scarce progress made so far at the nuclear talks in Vienna. Working groups had been set up here at Palais Coburg to try to reach a consensus. But European diplomats are showing frustration, saying Iran is wasting valuable time with unrealistic new proposals. The 2015 deal that was to be salvaged, they say, will soon be nothing more than an empty shell. And the United States is now warning about possible alternatives to diplomacy. Iran's chief negotiator Ali Bagheri Khani says his country is at least trying to make constructive proposals and that Western nations are playing blame games. However, Iran recently said it would not readmit inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency to its nuclear facility in Karaj, a key sticking point at the talks. It is still unclear whether concessions will come and from which side. Will Washington take the first step by lifting economic sanctions, or will Tehran offer a framework on lifting its nuclear program? Mutual trust has still not been restored after the US unilaterally withdrew from the pact 3 years ago, and it remains to be seen whether the mediators, China, Russia and Europe, can mend fences. This Viennese waltz, one step forward, sideways, then backwards, seems to be set to continue. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Vienna.
The International Energy Agency says rising cases of the Omicron variant are likely to temporarily slow global oil demand. The oil trade body slightly cut demand growth for this year and next. But the IEA says widespread vaccination campaigns mean the current COVID wave is likely to have less impact on economic activity than previous waves.
Japan's Toyota Motor Company says it's aiming to sell 3.5 million electric vehicles from 2030 and double the amount of models it offers to 30. The world's top-selling car maker said it would spend $70 billion on the plan. And it comes as Toyota says supply chain issues mean production stoppages will continue at some of its factories in Japan.
Shares in Chinese social media giant Weibo fell in pre-market trading after the company was hit with a fine of almost $500,000. The Cyberspace Administration of China fined the company's operator after it said some accounts and content violated laws and regulations. In response, Weibo said it would seek to improve its governance.
Tesla CEO Elon Musk has sold another $906 million in company stock. But at the same time, he's also exercising options to buy additional shares. Musk has now sold nearly $13 billion worth of shares since early November, when his Twitter followers voted for him to sell 10% of his stake in Tesla.
And do remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up, the French merger, plagued by setbacks and controversy, and now finally set to go ahead.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. French water and waste companies Veolia and Suez are set to receive European Union approval to merge.
The $14.7 billion deal was first agreed in April, but has been plagued by setbacks. Our correspondent Ryan Thompson joins us now from Brussels. Ryan, what's been the hold-up?
Hi there, Juliet. Well, it's been many months where this deal has been on the table. Of course, the two rubbish compactors are looking to get this deal done after it was proposed last October, but it's been wrapped up in lots of controversy, and it really seems like every time they move towards getting the deal done, there is another setback. What we are waiting for today is the approval, of course, from the European Commission antitrust body. Regulators say that these are two big rubbish collectors and they will potentially be able to dominate the market. There are questions over antitrust abilities here. This, of course, comes after they cleared another hurdle just a few months ago, which was French authorities who were worried that they would put employment at risk. It would complicate the interests of the French state, which owned a share in one of the smaller companies of Suez. There's a lot of drama wrapped up in this, but really, finally, it does seem that, at least according to Reuters reporting, there is an end in sight. We are expecting them to render a positive decision by the end of the day. The deadline is midnight here in Europe. But, Juliet, there has been so much here, lots of bitter rhetoric between the two sides, legal tussles with minor lawsuits filed at every single incident that they could. Eventually, in April, there was a bit of deal-making by the French finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, who was able to get the two sides to come to the table and see a common agreement. That, of course, also included a much higher share price to be included in the sale. But it is finally set, the deal is done, and the two sides say they're looking forward to working together, though they will have to spin off a number of assets, not just here in Europe, but also many, many abroad.
Ryan, it's gone right to the wire. Assuming it all goes through the regulators, what's it going to mean?
Well, it means that you're looking at one of the world's largest waste and water collectors, so they will certainly be able to enter foreign markets with this degree of dominance, because not only are they big here in Belgium and in France, but they have a number of assets spread out across Europe. So they're basically going to have to spin off some of their properties and projects that are in other corners of the world, but that's not to say that they will be eventually looking to pick those back up again or potentially get involved in new investments. There are also questions here about what they mean for competitors, notably competitors in China who have similar dominance and similar expertise in this field. They will surely be going bat to bat. This new partnership and this new brand will bring a little bit of competition to the field for these Chinese providers, and they will have a new edge in the competition fight here.
So I suppose now we should start thinking about what the new merged name is going to be. Ryan, thank you very much. Ryan Thompson there in Brussels.
US lawmakers are once again facing a deadline to raise the national debt limit in order to avoid a catastrophic default. Senators need to approve the hike after Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned there could be very little time to resolve the issue. Well, let's talk now to John Terrett, who is in New York for us. So, John, remind us, first of all, what the debt ceiling is.
Hey there, Juliet and Robin. I love talking about this story because it's almost completely unique to the United States. I think there are probably 2 other countries in the world that have this debt ceiling issue. And if you think of it like this, it's the U.S. credit card bill becoming due, okay? If you think of it like that, then everything else falls very nicely into place because we're talking about money that the Congress has already spent on things. It's on the credit card. And if they don't hike the limit, then they can't add new spending to that credit card, including paying people bond interest payments all over the world. So it's pretty serious stuff, really. And a good example of this would be if you have a credit card with a company, say, and they give you a limit of $1,000, and then you take the family away for the weekend, you have a big car repair bill, maybe it's your dad's birthday, it's his 60th, so you buy him a really big present, and all of a sudden, before you turn around, you're at $999, and only the credit card company can say, okay, we'll hike your limit to $1,500 so that you can keep spending. And that is exactly what's going on. Only the Congress can do that. Now, the reason we talk about this, the reason it's in the news, is that in the past there have been very, very severe, very bitter deadlines and closures, because if the debt ceiling is coming up, in order to preserve money, they close government buildings, they furlough workers, and they close parks and things like that. And they did that in 2013 when there was a huge row over Obamacare. And then the debt ceiling was only $16 trillion. It is a lot more than that now. So this time round in 2021, for various reasons, which I'll explain in a minute, they have come to a very rare deal, which means that this is going to be avoided. There will be no not paying of those bond bills. And the Treasury borrowing mechanism can continue along exactly as it normally does until at least 2023. I don't know the exact date, but it is going to get them at least the other side of the next round of congressional elections, which are pretty much a year away now. Robin and Juliet?
Well, John, that was a brilliant explanation of the debt ceiling, but what are the details of the debt ceiling deal?
Well, this is interesting again, you see, because in a very, very rare move, the Senate, this is where the problem is, the Senate, they created a bill, they drafted a bill, a bipartisan bill, Republicans and Democrats got together, created this bill, sent it off to President Biden, he signed it, and basically that paved the way for the debt ceiling hike to come in with what they call a simple majority. Now, in the Senate, the Democrats have 50, the Republicans have 50, the presiding vote is with the Vice President Kamala Harris, so she will vote in favor. So that's going to happen sometime today to avoid what would otherwise be a catastrophic default by the United States. And the debt ceiling at the moment is almost $29 trillion, so much more than 2016. And they'll probably hike it to get them through to 2023. The House will pass a vote, that's okay. Now, the reason all this has taken so long, Republicans were trying to tie all this debt ceiling stuff to the $2 trillion BBB bill, the Build Back Better bill, which is President Biden's signature legislation. The Democrats were trying to tie it to the Trump tax cuts that he brought in between 2017 and 2021. And I think really the Republicans have realized COVID, let's not mess around too much. Also, they're looking very good for those midterm elections next November right now. And the Democrats, I think, are realizing that bashing Trump doesn't get them very far, that he's still very popular. And Hillary Clinton said only 2 days ago that he was convinced that he would run again in 2024. So all of this reminds Americans that their Congress sets its own rules, and many of them are wondering why on earth they don't do this more often. If you can just draft a bit of legislation and get round the rules, why don't you do that? And in fact, just briefly, President Biden said on camera a couple of weeks ago, well, they don't do it that way. They could do it that way, but they don't. Let's let them work it all out and we'll get there in the end. So that is the thing. I mean, if they want to move, they can move. But as you know, very often for bipartisan reasons, they don't really do that. And finally, as for that Build Back Better bill, it's now looking like well after Christmas before it gets any kind of traction, any kind of vote. Guys?
OK, John Terrett in New York, thank you very much.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has vowed to improve defence and intelligence ties with Southeast Asian allies in response to what he called China's aggressive actions in the region. The comments came during a trip to Indonesia, part of a 4-day tour of Southeast Asia, which takes in Malaysia and Thailand. Blinken said countries across the region wanted China's behaviour to change. The spokesman for China's foreign ministry accused the US of inciting divisions in the region.
Hundreds of abuse survivors in the United States are set to receive $380 million in compensation after reaching a settlement with sports bodies USA Gymnastics and the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. It's one of the largest ever payouts for a sexual abuse case. The former national gymnastics team doctor Larry Nassar was sentenced to over 300 years in jail in 2018 for sexually abusing gymnasts.
The Canadian government has pledged $40 billion in compensation for Indigenous children and families who were discriminated against while in foster care. It follows a historic ruling by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, which said First Nations children in Ottawa were sent to boarding schools or foster care where they were routinely abused.
3 police officers have been killed and 11 injured in an attack in Indian-administered Kashmir. Gunmen opened fire on a police vehicle outside the city of Srinagar hours after police shot dead 2 militants at a nearby checkpoint. Police are searching for the group behind the attack.
Still to come on CGTN, how new pandemic restrictions in Germany are threatening to derail an economic rebound.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the 2nd year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliette Mann and me, Robin Dwyer. The headlines again. Britain's Boris Johnson faces a rebellion from his own party as lawmakers vote on new COVID rules for England. And yet another deadline. US senators are racing against time to raise the government's debt ceiling and avoid a federal shutdown.
Supply bottlenecks and a new wave of COVID infections are slowing Germany's economic recovery. The IFO Institute for Economic Research has slashed its forecast for the country's economic growth by 0.5% over the next 3 months. Well, Brendan Brown is an economist and founding partner at Macro Hedge Advisors. Good to see you again, Brendan. So, in your opinion, what is slowing Germany's economic growth right now?
Well, there's two things. There's the pandemic itself, and there's the international bottlenecks, particularly chips and automobile production. But I would qualify the IFO report that came out today. What they're showing is, in fact, what you could call a technical recession, which goes through the fourth quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year, meaning there'll be no growth or actually slightly negative growth in Germany. But then what IFO has beyond that is something of a boom through the middle 2 quarters of next year.
But it's a gloomier picture from the outset. How much of a headache could that be, do you think, for the new coalition government with all their climate and digitalisation plans?
Well, it's not encouraging, but of course everybody knows this situation, and the new government only came into power last week. What's perhaps comforting for the new government in the IFO report is their projection that the total government debt as a percentage of GDP is actually falling to 64% by 2023, and that the peak will have been this year at 70%. So Germany, on those sort of figures for its public finances, is in a much stronger position than any other advanced economy.
So there are some bright spots. For consumers, though, inflation is a worry. And what do you expect to hear from the Bundesbank later this week on that front?
Well, of course, we have the ECB meeting, and the Bundesbank chair, Dr. Weidmann, is resigning at the end of this year, so there's a sort of limbo there. From what one's heard from the Bundesbank, their main concern at the present, besides inflation, is the semi-bubble or actual bubble going on in the housing market. But again, coming back to the IFO report, their inflation projections for 2020 to 2023 are somewhat comforting. They see the peak in inflation early next year, and the overall inflation rate coming back below 2% in 2023.
I'd say you've got quite a positive outlook then, looking ahead to 2022 and beyond. You mentioned IFO talking about boom time kicking in a bit later on. When do you see recovery kicking in?
Well, that's a plausible forecast. What I would say is that we're not in a Wirtschaftswunder here, or economic miracle. Even if the IFO's reasonably optimistic forecast came into reality, German GDP in 2023 would be only 2 to 3% above where it was on the eve of the pandemic. So there's no miracle here.
So no miracle. And how concerned are you about Omicron and COVID and potential future variants?
Well, again, one can only take what's in the knowledge space out there, and clearly it's going to be a difficult winter, but there are some more optimistic medical scenarios beyond that about this being mild, etc., etc. So the key for Germany is going to be, as you say, on the consumption side, whether households feel confident to go out and spend again in the spring, but also critically the automobile production lines.
Brendan Brown, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you.
Hungary's central bank is raising its base interest rate again as the country faces its highest inflation in 14 years. The rising cost of living could become a challenge for Prime Minister Viktor Orban in next year's elections. And many Hungarians are already feeling it in their pockets, as our correspondent Mia Alberti reports.
We are at the Fevem Square Market in central Budapest. It's one of the biggest in the city. Consumer price index in Hungary has risen by 7%. But here, it's very easy to find products much more expensive than that. So we did some shopping, and one loaf of bread is 20% more expensive. That's a lot for the common Hungarian family. And imported goods, like these tangerines from Spain, have cost me double of what they cost last year. We heard from some of the shoppers and vendors who told me that basically everything is more expensive in this market.
I pay more at the cash register, that's my experience.
Yeah, the price of fruit and meat has increased rapidly, by 20% for sure.
The matryoshka dolls, this was a 6 pieces, 3,900. Last time this was just 3,000. 2 years ago, $10, and now is $12, $13. It's a lots of inflation.
Inflation hit a 14-year high, and the Hungarian forint has hit an all-time low against the euro. The Prime Minister Viktor Orban has increased public spending ahead of next year's elections, but that only increased the deficit. Analysts don't expect the scenario to change in the coming months, which could ultimately cost Orban the vote of many Hungarians who feel left out of pocket. Mia Alberti, CGTN in Budapest.
Well, let's stay in Hungary, which has become the first country to issue a green sovereign panda bond in China, in the Chinese currency, the renminbi. Now, it's worth about some $150 million and facilitated by the Bank of China. The bond has a maturity of 3 years and is the third renminbi-denominated bond issued by the Hungarian government. Both countries have hailed the new bond as a milestone in their financial cooperation.
Hungarian sovereign issuers always are the pioneer of China opening up of capital markets. You are the first sovereign panda bond based on the Bond Connect mechanism, and most importantly, this first green panda bond issued in China capital markets that not only shows the good relationship between China and Hungary, and also shows your strong support to RMB internationalizations.
We have already been successful issuer on the Hungarian and on the international marketplace. However, for us, it is not enough to be present on the US dollar and on the euro markets, but diversification of our portfolio is inevitable and is evident at the same time. Diversification in currencies and diversification in markets in geographical terms is absolutely key in our policy. In this context, our entry to the Chinese domestic market is a manifestation of this very conscious diversification strategy. We definitely wish to rely on all reliable partners and markets on the world, including China.
88 people are now known to have died after devastating tornadoes in the southeast of the United States. Over 100 people are still missing. Searches are continuing in the US state of Kentucky, where most of the victims died, and from where Dan Williams now joins us. So, Dan, you're in Mayfield in Kentucky. What's the latest where you are?
Yeah, huge operations taking place here by various authorities, it has to be said. Let's start with that death toll number. Of course, that has fluctuated over the last few days, and one of the reasons for that, according to the Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, is because that different ways that different authorities have counted those numbers. Here in Kentucky, the number is at 74, but there are more than 100 people still unaccounted for. So the search for those people continues. Some 100 National Guard troops are going door to door, carrying out those searches. And we also saw canine sniffer dog units as well, searching through the rubble, trying to find people. The potential, of course, still for those survivors, but it has to be remembered that we haven't found a survivor here since Saturday morning, and the Governor, Andy Beshear, saying that it would be a miracle if indeed that happens. While all that is still taking place and is still a key focus, there's a huge cleanup operation which is ongoing, has been of course since the events on Friday, but huge amounts of machinery, cranes, diggers, really picking up all the debris here, knocking down what buildings, many of the buildings that were left half standing but very, very badly damaged as well. So that being another key focus, in a way, trying to make this town safe going forward. And of course then comes the more painfully long rebuilding process as well. That would be the next step. But in the meantime, you can probably hear all around me all of these different machinery going about their business and continuing that cleanup operation.
So, Dan, looking ahead, President Joe Biden is expected in the area tomorrow. Will that make a difference?
Well, certainly for many of the residents that I've spoken to about this visit, they're welcoming that. They want the focus still to be here. There's many people with a lot of questions, a lot of insecurity here. I spoke to a few of the business owners. They say they were vastly underinsured. So there's a number of questions that they would like to put to the President of the United States. And so it will in some way bring a bit of that extra focus here. Of course, President Biden himself, he doesn't want to be here. He doesn't and get in the way of the continuing operations here, the rescue operations, of course. Still the hope, as I say, of finding survivors. So by tomorrow, he feels that would be still therefore more of a possibility. He has been working, he says, and according to the Kentucky governor, been close communications between the two following the events on Friday. So certainly there is a sense, if you like, of coming to survey the damage for himself and to see what else potentially could be required as this town and many others across Kentucky and in other states as well grapple with the events still of what happened here on Friday night.
Dan Williams in Mayfield in Kentucky, thank you very much.
You're watching Global Business Europe. Still ahead, jobs bonanza. The unemployment rate is falling in the UK, with a record number of people starting new jobs in November.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. A powerful 7.4 magnitude earthquake has struck eastern Indonesia, causing part of a small hill to collapse. Hundreds of people fled buildings, but there's been no immediate report of casualties or damage. Several tsunami warnings have now been revoked.
2 crew members from a British cargo ship are being held on suspicion of gross negligence after a collision that caused a Danish boat to sink in the Baltic Sea. At least one person was killed when the 55-metre vessel capsized, while another crew member is missing. Authorities tested the crew of the Scott carrier for drugs and alcohol. 1 British and 1 Croatian sailor were found to be over the limit and arrested, pending further investigations.
It's been confirmed that a prolonged heat wave in the Arctic last year caused the region's hottest temperature on record. A peak of 38 degrees Celsius was reached in a Siberian town 115 kilometres north of the Arctic Circle. The World Meteorological Organization has warned the Arctic will see greater extremes of temperature as climate change unleashes more heat waves.
International aid to Afghanistan has been frozen since the Taliban seized power in August. But donors have agreed to transfer $280 million for humanitarian relief.
The money is expected to be transferred directly to 2 aid agencies by the end of this month, bypassing the Taliban government. Zamarilai Abbasin reports from Kabul.
Almost 4 months have passed since the disbursement of aid was paused for war-weary Afghanistan. On Friday, the World Bank confirmed that donors have approved the transfer of $280 million from the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund to UNICEF and the World Food Programme. The aid aims to help Afghanistan respond to its humanitarian crisis while bypassing the government formed by the Taliban. The Taliban says the international community has not been realistic and must avoid mistakes of the past.
Since an Islamic government was formed in Afghanistan, it is independent, responsible, committed to its pledges, been applying a positive policy with a very constructive foreign policy. It's a golden opportunity for the international community, particularly the powerful countries of the world, to interact with today's Afghanistan and a new chapter of relations that could benefit both Afghanistan and the international community.
Soon after the Taliban took power on August 15, the U.S. blocked access to $9.5 billion in Afghanistan's central bank reserves held in the U.S. The IMF paused the release of more than $400 million in funds, citing a lack of clarity with an international community regarding recognition of a government in Afghanistan. The World Bank also stopped disbursing aid money reserved for the country.
We request the international community to put pressure on the U.S. to unfreeze our money.
As a human being, I urge the international community to assist the people of Afghanistan based on the values of humanity.
Afghan experts welcome the aid but insist that it is not enough to help millions of people in need.
As the world tries to punish the government of the people of Afghanistan, in fact, they're not punishing the government.
As much as this money is helpful, it's not enough unless the international community engages with the Taliban, we find a working relationship, and the Federal Reserves of Afghanistan can be released. This is never going to be enough.
It is my request to the world community, the World Bank, IMF, and U.S. government and European Union to come forward and help Afghanistan to ease the economic crisis.
Many experts believe that this winter will be the harshest of all times for millions of Afghans. According to World Food Programme, more than 22 million Afghans, more than half the population, require urgent food assistance. The UN agency has commented that this is a figure never seen before. Zmaryale Abasin, CGTN, Kabul.
Staying with Afghanistan, and the country has criticised the United States after Washington decided not to discipline military personnel involved in a deadly bombing in August. 10 civilians were killed, including 7 children, in a US drone attack in Kabul.
In October, the US offered compensation to relatives of those killed in the strike, although the money has not yet been paid.
We want the families of those who were brutally killed to be assisted with compensation. It is a demand of the people, but the Americans deny it. The US has committed many similar actions in the world, and now it's saying this. The US has killed people in Afghanistan in the last 20 years. It's an ethical responsibility.
There are 500,000 more people employed now in the UK than there were before the pandemic. There had been fears that the end of the government's multi-billion-dollar job support scheme would lead to more contracts being terminated. But new data shows unemployment is falling, with a record number of people starting new jobs in November. Well, joining us now to shed a bit more light on the subject is employment lawyer Anna Lennon. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme today, Anna. So people had been expecting a rise in unemployment once furlough came to an end, but instead more people are in work than ever. Is it a case that we've not seen the full effect of the end of furlough yet, or is something else going on?
Well, I think we have seen the end of the furlough, but for the most part, I think. But the thing that's happening now is that people are evaluating their lives and what they want to do in terms of their careers, the flexibility that's been afforded to them in the past 18 months. So I think that whilst the big resignation hasn't happened, it certainly hasn't happened yet. Now is the time for employees to have a real voice and a say in their terms of employment, particularly as regards where they work and the hours that they work.
So falling unemployment then and a rising number of vacancies, is it really a job seekers market right now?
It looks that way, particularly in certain roles. So I work in the field of HR. There are more HR roles than ever before in my experience, particularly in specialist functions such as reward, because employers are really having to reevaluate their terms and conditions that they offer their employees. There is a war on talent to try and keep those employees in place. And part of that means looking at the reward packages that are on offer. Similarly, I'm seeing with sales roles, the sales sector is getting much better, and there's much more of a competition for roles in that space.
So attracting employees more difficult. How difficult is it to hang on to their best employees for companies?
Well, as I said, I don't think the big resignation has happened quite in the way that people anticipated. But what I think is the case is that an element of flexibility is now inbuilt in everyone's working life as a result of COVID and working from home for so long during the pandemic. So I think employees have got an opportunity here to be a bit more bullish about the terms that they negotiate up front when they're joining new companies, but also if they're already in companies, it's about how can we get our employees to stay, and that again means listening to the requests for flexibility and other ways of working and taking those on board.
So are we going to see that, do you think, as a big sea change amongst companies now, offering what employees want, such as flexibility, going forward?
Well, what I'm seeing is that the really progressive employers have already, over the past year, once the pandemic and the effect of that became known, they've already been looking at their reward packages and what they need to do to retain their staff. And that's not just in the space of reward, but also things like learning and development, opportunities for promotion. Lots of employers have had to restructure as a result of the pandemic. So it's now about looking at how to keep talent in those new roles, in their new structures, to avoid them moving on to the competition.
So we're seeing something of a recovery in the jobs market then, but how might Omicron damage that recovery?
Well, I think we're on a bit of a roller coaster with the different variants coming in. The current variant seems to be the most impactful, but with Mr. Johnson saying that people should continue to work from home where they can, I think that's a reinforcement of the message that many employers are already listening to. So what I'm seeing among my clients is where employees can work from home, they can continue to do that. Mr. Johnson's additional announcement last week is just a reinforcement of that. And where they can't work from home because of the nature of their roles, it's really important that employers continue to be very focused on COVID-secure workplaces.
So that's potentially the pandemic effect. We've talked a lot over the past several years about Brexit. Is that still having an effect on the jobs market in terms of availability of employees?
I think it is in some sectors, particularly hospitality. There's a shortage of workers in the NHS who might traditionally have come from abroad as well. So I think that will be an ongoing matter, compounded by what's happened during the pandemic.
Anna Lennon, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, restrictions on buying and selling housing for profit is changing the real estate market in China.
Policymakers at China's recent Central Economic Work Conference stressed that housing is for living in, not for speculation. CGTN's Zhang Sheshuen reports.
Chinese residents now looking for new housing are increasingly those with real needs, like getting married or welcoming a new family member. Yan Jingying became one of them in July when her second son turned 3, and it was time to get both boys their own room.
I want to give each of my 2 sons a room. We just heard that the central bank will lower the reserve requirement ratio, and that made us really happy because we think it will help us get our loan more quickly. One of my friends just got a new home, and he got his loan approval in 3 or 4 months. I hope I can get one in a month.
It has been 5 years since China began keeping an eye on speculation in the real estate market. Major cities in China like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen have rolled out a series of new measures to regulate and control the property market this year. And that has already had an effect. In September, the number of Chinese cities with falling home prices hit the highest in 6 years.
Last year, the whole real estate market was sort of hot. But since the launch of control measures at the beginning of the year, the market has been cooling down, with the sales becoming stable. Since China first stated that houses are for living, not for speculation, home buyers' motivations have changed. They figured out that housing prices may not continue to rise in the future, so they are no longer looking at home buying as an investment. Instead, they are buying them to actually live in. One result is that new apartment designs are now emphasizing more functional rooms.
Data from Beike show that the average age of China's home buyers this year is between 36 and 38 in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. That's 2 or 3 years later than the average age of buyers in 2018. And many tenants have now rented for more than 10 years. The market changes mean the whole real estate sector is undergoing a reshuffle.
The previous high turnover and high debt model won't keep a company alive anymore. Real estate firms need to adjust their business models and focus on more stable operations. The industry may not generate that much profit in the future, so they should control their leverage and plan more carefully. Well-financed central and state-owned companies will enter the housing market to provide more affordable homes for young residents.
The Economic Work Conference emphasized the need to implement housing policies differently in different geographic areas to ensure the healthy development of local markets nationwide. Shao says that in key urban areas where young people can face substantial housing pressure, the supply of long-term rental housing should be improved. Plans for that are fueling what a blue book released by Ziru Research calls a golden decade for China's rental housing market, which it says will be worth nearly 10 trillion yuan by 2030. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
The small Slovenian village of Lucha is trying to become fully self-sustainable.
Officials hope it can become a role model for solar power in remote regions around the world. CGTN's Alyosha Milenkovic reports.
A cat is catching the last glimpses of the fall sun before the winter comes. These solar panels on the roof of Tomasz Żobnik's house in Luce are doing the same thing.
The capacity of my solar power station is 13 kilowatts. Over the year, we produce 13 to 14 megawatts of solar electrical energy.
Tomasz is just one of the local villagers who decided to join the local solar revolution. It features solar panels on roofs, a charging station for electric cars, a huge battery pack for the village, biomass central heating for public buildings. All of it is part of the revolution.
It's practically self-sustainable with the electricity that comes from the solar panels. We have a huge battery that charges when there is enough sun and empties when there's no sun. The area is self-sufficient, with the solar panels making around 84% of our electrical energy needs.
The steps help individuals reduce installation costs and at the same time provide more supply stability. Excess solar power that villagers produce is stored in a huge battery pack inside this building. Luce is in a remote area, and residents frequently lose power from the national grid. Now, when that happens, those batteries are providing them with the electricity for 3 days. And all of that was achieved with some clever solutions from Petrol, Slovenia's leading supplier of fossil fuels.
Distribution system operator said that this part of Luce village who wanted to participate in the project altogether could put only 10 kilowatts of solar power plants on their roofs. With our tools, with our smart grid technologies, with our models and algorithms, we were able to increase this to 100 kilowatts.
In spite of its name, Petrol is deciding to go green and gradually started switching to non-carbon-based energy sources. A decision that has brought positive changes to the village of Luce. Privately owned solar cells, communal batteries, LED streetlights, electric bicycles and cars, biomass central heating. Is this the future in making? Who knows? But it seems that for sure might be a step in the right direction. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Luce.
To the Beijing Winter Olympics now. And as the countdown continues, the host city's customer service workers are improving their English skills. Zhao Yunfei has more.
For some people, the Olympics is a life-changing event. Liu Weiwei never thought she could end up working in the hospitality industry in her hometown.
In the past, we were farmers. Now this place has developed. The Olympics are coming. We've got better jobs. We take shuttle to work, which is quite convenient.
Better job means more responsibility. Learning English has become her daily routine. Liu Jie is the ski resort's English language trainer.
Many of our colleagues working in the front line are undereducated in certain fields. They change their roles from farmers to service staff. They're passionate about learning English, but it takes a lot of time.
You are welcome. So Liu filters out the regular words and phrases based on the workers' jobs and hands out brochures to help them study. Chongli district used to be stuck in poverty, but that's no longer the case. Thanks to the influence of the Olympics, the winter sports tourism has become a major driving force, lifting up the local economy.
There's a culture behind each word, and learning a new language establishes an atmosphere. It's a sense of tolerance. International events like the Olympics can influence everyone.
The Olympics has connected Chongli with the world. Liu says he hopes international guests feel welcomed when they come to visit. Zhao Yunfei, CGTN, Zhangjiakou, Hebei Province.
That's the Winter Olympics. Now look ahead to the next Summer Olympics, as organisers of the Paris Olympics in 2024 have unveiled plans for an innovative opening ceremony. It won't be at the Stade de France, but it will instead take place on the banks of the River Seine. Artist impressions show the athletes being transported down the river in front of an estimated 600,000 spectators. That's 10 times the capacity of the stadium. Now, billed as an opening ceremony like no other, acrobats and artists will entertain crowds along the 6-kilometre route before a light show at Paris's famous Trocadero for the grand finale.
Our main stories. Britain's Boris Johnson faces a rebellion from his own party as lawmakers vote on new COVID rules for England.
A warning, German economic growth will be lower than expected next year as supply chain problems and COVID-19 infections continue to bite.
And Hungary's central bank raises interest rates again as surging inflation threatens to damage Viktor Orban's re-election hopes.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
You know what I'm going to say next? We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. Plus, here in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.